I had just put the last of my library books into a donation box when my daughter-in-law breezed in and announced, "I've listed the cottage for sale. You're too old to use it." I just smiled. The very next day, the real estate agent's sign was gone. Not because she had a change of heart, but because I'd already given the deed to someone who truly deserved a new beginning. And just like that, her grand plan crumbled into dust. It was a Thursday morning, the kind with a crisp autumn chill in the air. I'd just come home from my own retirement party at the community library, carrying my last box of memories. A handmade card from a child who learned to love reading in my story hour. A collection of bookmarks from around the world gifted by patrons. A chipped mug that read, "Librarians know all the good stories." 35 years as the head librarian at Oak Creek Public Library. 35 years of waking up at the crack of dawn. 35 years of recommending books, helping with research, and offering a quiet, safe space for children who just needed a place to be after school. And now, at 68, my final chapter had begun. I was sorting through my retirement paperwork on the kitchen table when I heard the front door swing open, the sound echoing in the quiet house. Not a single knock, no call of, "Hello?" Nothing. Just the familiar creak of the old oak door and the sharp, impatient click of high heels on my hardwood floors. Tiffany entered my home the way a storm enters a peaceful valley. She was wearing a sharp, tailored blazer she always wore when she was on a mission. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe ponytail that looked almost painful. And then there was that look in her eyes. A look I'd come to dread over the last 4 years. A gaze that wasn't seeing me, but was instead scanning, appraising, and calculating what could be gained. She didn't bother with a greeting. She just stood there in my doorway, hands on her hips, one foot tapping impatiently as if I were a slow employee who needed to be managed. "Carol," she said, always using my first name, never with the warmth a daughter-in-law might offer. "I've made an executive decision. I'm selling the Lake Cottage. You have no need for it anymore." She said it so matter-of-factly. A woman your age shouldn't be worrying about maintaining a second property. It's a liability. "Besides," she continued, her voice dropping into a tone of false concern, "David and I need the money from the sale to finally put a down payment on a decent house in the city." Just like that. No discussion, no consultation. As if she were deciding the fate of an old, dusty armchair that was taking up too much space. My cottage. The little 2-bedroom cabin my dear husband, Frank, had built with his own 2 hands. The place where we'd spent every summer for 30 years. The cottage that held the echo of my son David's childhood laughter, that had witnessed my grief when I lost Frank, that held the scent of pine needles and lake water and 1,000 happy memories. I felt a cold dread spread through my chest, a hollow feeling that threatened to swallow me whole. But then, something shifted inside me. Instead of tears, instead of anger, instead of pleading, a small, quiet smile found its way to my lips. It must have been the last thing she expected, because I saw a flicker of confusion in her eyes, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together for a fraction of a second. "Did you hear what I said?" she asked, her voice sharp, the one she used when she suspected someone wasn't immediately complying with her wishes. "I heard you perfectly, Tiffany," I replied, my voice so calm it was almost a whisper. It surprised me as much as it did her. "Good. The realtor will be by tomorrow to put up the sign. I already have a buyer interested. He's offering $85,000. It's a fair price for a place that old. $85,000 that I knew would disappear into her and David's life, never to be seen by me again." She turned on her heel and walked out as abruptly as she had entered, leaving behind the faint cloying scent of her perfume and the crushing weight of her declaration. I stood there in my kitchen, the smell of old paper from my boxes mixing with her expensive fragrance. For a moment, I felt the walls of my own home pressing in on me. But that smile, it stayed right where it was. Because Tiffany had just made a colossal miscalculation. She had poked a sleeping bear. She had awakened a part of me that had been quiet for far too long. My self-respect. And what she didn't know, what my own son didn't know, was that I had a story of my own. A secret I had guarded for 20 long years. An ace I was finally ready to play. They had no idea what was coming. The next day, the cottage would indeed be off the market, but not for any reason Tiffany could possibly imagine. If you want to find out how this quiet librarian taught the harshest lesson of her life to the one person who tried to take everything from her, stay with me until the end. And if you've ever felt underestimated, subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing these real-life stories that prove we are stronger than they think. Because what happened next was a plot twist that even I, a lifelong lover of stories, never saw coming. I should have recognized the warning signs the day Tiffany walked into our lives, a whirlwind of ambition disguised as charm. But a mother, you see, a mother always wants to see the best in the person who makes her son happy, even if that happiness is a fragile illusion. It was the summer of 2021. David was 43, and I had almost given up on the idea of him settling down. Not because he wasn't a wonderful man. He was. He was too wonderful, too gentle, too trusting. He was the kind of soul who took people at their word, who never questioned motives, who assumed everyone's heart was as open and honest as his own. I had raised him by myself since he was 10, after my Frank passed from a sudden heart attack. There was no life insurance, no big savings. It was just me and my boy. A town librarian with a modest salary and a child who had just lost his hero. Those were lean years. So lean. I remember late nights cataloging books, taking extra shifts, all while making sure his homework was done and his uniform was clean for school. I remember selling my own mother's jewelry to pay for his braces. I tutored kids on the weekends so he could go to a decent summer camp. I wanted him to have everything, to never feel the lack that I felt every single day. David studied finance, became a junior analyst at a firm in the city. He didn't make a fortune, maybe $60,000 a year, but he was steady, responsible, kind, just a bit lonely. And then she appeared. Tiffany had been a new hire at his firm in the marketing department. She was 30, a good 13 years younger than my David. She was striking, with that kind of polished, intimidating beauty that makes you feel a little underdressed no matter what you're wearing. She carried herself with an air of absolute confidence, like she knew exactly what she wanted and exactly how to get it. David brought her over for dinner just a month after they started dating. I remember that day so clearly. I made my famous lasagna, garlic bread from scratch, and a big garden salad. I even used the good china, the set I'd inherited from my grandmother. I wanted to welcome her, to show her that my son came from a loving, warm home. Tiffany arrived 20 minutes late. She didn't apologize. She surveyed my cozy little house, her eyes lingering on the worn furniture, and offered a tight smile. She barely touched the lasagna. "Oh, I'm watching my carbs," she said, pushing a single noodle around her plate. David just chuckled nervously. I swallowed my disappointment. Over the course of that dinner, Tiffany managed to do 3 things: scroll through her phone incessantly, complain about how much better the restaurants were in the big city she'd moved from, and ask, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, if I'd ever considered downsizing. "You know, property values in these older neighborhoods are stagnant," she'd said, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on her wine glass. "A place like this with its vintage charm could probably fetch you about $300,000. Have you thought about it, Carol?" Not Mrs. Peterson, not even a respectful pause. Just Carol, as if we were college roommates. David looked at her with pure adoration, hanging on her every word. I just smiled politely and changed the subject back to his work. But that night, long after they'd left, I sat in my quiet kitchen with a knot in my stomach. Something just felt wrong. 5 months later, they were engaged. 5 months. David called me, ecstatic, breathless. "Mom, Tiffany's the one. She makes me so happy. We're getting married next month at a little vineyard, just a small affair. A small affair because David didn't have much in savings. What I would later discover was that Tiffany had nothing but debt. Credit cards charged to the limit with designer labels, an old car loan she'd defaulted on, and a string of short-lived jobs she'd quit because they weren't fulfilling enough. But I didn't know that then. At the wedding, I gave them a handmade quilt I had spent weeks stitching. Tiffany thanked me, but I saw her tuck it away in a closet later, murmuring something to a bridesmaid about it being a little too rustic for their modern apartment. And from that day forward, my son began to fade away. Not physically, but in spirit. The Sunday dinners he had never missed became sporadic. First, it was every other week, then once a month. Soon, it was only on holidays. The excuse was always the same. Tiffany made other plans, Mom. You know how it is. No, I didn't know. I had been a wife, and I had never, not once, kept Frank from his own mother. The daily phone calls we used to share dwindled into short, impersonal text messages. Busy at work, Mom. TTYL. But he never did talk to me later. And when I would visit their trendy, overpriced apartment, I could feel Tiffany's impatience, her eyes darting to the clock as if I were an appointment that had run over its allotted time. The worst part, though, was hearing her opinions come out of my son's mouth. Mom, don't you think it's time to start thinking about a retirement community? It's a lot of upkeep for a single woman. Mom, Tiffany was saying you should really get your finances in order. Do you have a will? Mom, you have some savings, right? Because we could really use a little help with a down payment. My David, my sweet boy, had become her mouthpiece, and I said nothing. I just nodded and smiled. I was terrified that if I pushed back, if I told him what I really thought of her, I would lose him completely. So I bit my tongue with every passive-aggressive comment, every thinly veiled insult, every suggestion that was framed as concern for my well-being. Until that Thursday, the day of my retirement, the day Tiffany decided my husband's legacy was just another asset to be liquidated. And that's when a little voice inside me, a voice that sounded a lot like my own mother, whispered, "Enough is enough." But before I could even make my move, things took an even darker turn. Because Tiffany didn't just want the cottage, she wanted to erase my entire life. It wasn't a quick, clean break. It was a slow, methodical campaign, designed to isolate and control me, drop by insidious drop. The 2 years following their marriage felt like being caught in a slow-moving flood. At first, you barely notice the water rising, but then one day, you look around and you're struggling to keep your head above the surface. It started with the requests for money. The first one came about 4 months after the wedding. A frantic call from David, his voice strained. Mom, could you possibly lend us $800? Tiffany had an unexpected dental emergency. We'll pay you back on the first of the month, I swear. $800 was a big chunk of my bi-weekly paycheck, but it was for my son. I transferred the money without a second thought. They never paid me back. 2 months later, another call. Mom, we need $500. Tiffany's car transmission went out. It's critical for her job. So I dipped into my rainy day fund, the money I kept for a new roof or a broken furnace. That loan was never repaid either. Then came the big one. $3,000 for a can't-miss investment opportunity. Tiffany had discovered a new wellness startup that was supposedly going to be the next big thing. Mom, this is it. This is going to set us up for life. We'll pay you back double in a year. That startup folded in 3 months. I never saw a penny of my $3,000 again, and Tiffany never spoke of it again. Over those 2 years, I gave them a total of $9,200. $9,200 from a librarian whose pension was going to be a modest $1,800 a month. But it wasn't just the money. It was the slow, creeping invasion into my life, like a weed wrapping its tendrils around everything I held dear. It started with her using David's old key to my house. She'd let herself in when I was at the library, always with a flimsy excuse. "Oh, Carol, we were just in the neighborhood and I wanted to drop off this Tupperware you lent us. Hope you don't mind." But I would come home to find things subtly out of place. A stack of mail on my desk shuffled through, a drawer in my filing cabinet not quite closed. She was snooping. I didn't know what she was looking for, but the violation of it made my skin crawl. Then the comments about my house became more frequent, more pointed. "Mom, this place is really getting to be too much for you, isn't it? 3 bedrooms. You're only using 1. It's such a waste of space. You know, this neighborhood isn't as safe as it used to be. Have you ever thought about a condo? Gated community, security, much more practical for someone your age. All that money you'd get from the sale, you could invest it. We could help you manage it. And David, my dear David, would just sit there and nod, like a puppet on a string." The family dinners, the few that still happened, transformed from pleasant catch-ups into veiled interrogations. "So, Carol, how much exactly will your pension be? Do you have a long-term care insurance policy? Who's the beneficiary? Have you updated your will recently? It's so important to have these things in order." At my age, I was 66. I walked 3 miles every day. I was healthier than Tiffany, who lived on diet sodas and takeout. But in her eyes, I was already 1 foot in the grave, and David just let it happen. He never once stepped in. The breaking point, before the final break, came one Sunday in early spring. I had made a big pot of chicken and dumplings, David's favorite comfort food since he was a boy. He ate 2 bowls. Tiffany picked at a single dumpling. Then, right in the middle of what should have been a peaceful meal, she dropped the bombshell. "Carol, David and I have been talking, and we think it would be for the best, for your own safety and peace of mind, if you started looking into assisted living facilities." The air went out of the room. My blood turned to ice. "Assisted living?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes, but a really nice one. A place with organized activities, nurses on call, other people your age. You wouldn't be so isolated all day. It's what's best for you." What's best for me? Or what was best for her? An empty house she could sell, a life she could manage from a distance. "Mom, it's not a terrible idea," David mumbled, his eyes fixed on his empty bowl. "You'd have more companionship." Companionship? I, who had spent my life surrounded by people, by books, by community? They wanted to put me away in a home as if I were senile. "I am not going to any facility," I said, and the steel in my voice surprised even me. "This is my home. Frank and I built a life here. I am staying." Tiffany's lips tightened into a thin, angry line. David just stared at his hands. The subject was dropped, but I knew it wasn't over. I knew they hadn't given up. In the weeks that followed, Tiffany began a campaign of public humiliation. At my niece's barbecue, she said loudly, for everyone to hear, "Oh, Susan, you have to keep an eye on Carol. You know how it is with the elderly. They start to forget things. The other day she left a pot on the stove, almost burned the kitchen down." It was a complete fabrication. I had never done such a thing. But I saw the looks of concern on my relatives' faces, the pity in their eyes. At the grocery store, we ran into an old colleague of mine. Tiffany, who had insisted on coming with me to help, put on her most concerned face. "Mrs. Davis, it's so lovely to see you. Say, do you happen to know a good geriatric specialist? Carol has been having some memory lapses lately. David and I are getting worried." I wasn't having memory lapses. My mind was as sharp as ever. But Tiffany was weaving a story, painting a picture of me as a dotty old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own affairs. And David never, ever defended me. One afternoon, I finally confronted him when he stopped by alone to drop something off. "David, why do you let her say those things about me?" He just stood there, staring at the rug, looking like the little boy who'd just broken a vase. "She doesn't mean any harm, Mom. She's just concerned." Concerned? She's trying to convince the world I'm losing my mind. "Don't be so dramatic, Mom. Tiffany loves you. She just wants what's best for you." That phrase again, what's best for me. It was in that moment that I realized, with a soul-crushing certainty, that I had lost my son. The physical person was there, but the boy I knew, the kind, loyal, grateful man I had raised, was gone. He had been replaced by a hollow echo of his wife. That night, I cried. I wept with an anguish I hadn't felt since Frank died. Because losing a husband is a terrible pain, but losing a living child, that is a grief that has no name. And just when I thought the ache in my heart couldn't get any deeper, my retirement came, and with it, Tiffany's declaration about the cottage. That was the moment something inside me finally broke, and something new, something hard and unyielding, was forged in its place. There was a secret I had held onto for 2 decades, waiting for the perfect moment. That moment had finally, tragically, arrived. But to understand the power of that secret, I have to take you back 20 years, to the year 2005, the year I met Mr. Arthur Gable. Mr. Gable lived 2 houses down from me, in a modest brick bungalow with a porch swing and the most beautiful rose garden in the neighborhood. He had been a widower for over a decade, with no children and no family to speak of. It was just him, his books, and his roses. He was 75 when we first properly met. I was 48 and had just lost my Frank a year prior. Our friendship began with a fallen ladder. One Saturday afternoon, I saw him trying to clean his gutters, looking unsteady. I rushed over and insisted on holding the ladder for him. He was so grateful, he invited me in for iced tea. That glass of iced tea turned into a weekly ritual. Every Saturday, I would walk down and we would sit on his porch swing. Mr. Gable would make sweet tea with fresh mint from his garden, and I would bring over a slice of whatever I'd baked that morning. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. Books, gardening, the changing world, loneliness. He told me things I don't think he'd ever told another soul. How much he missed his wife, Eleanor. How the quietest moments of the day were the loudest with her absence. How a home without laughter is just a house. And I, in turn, shared my own fears with him. My fear of not being a good enough single parent to David. My fear of the empty years stretching out ahead of me. My fear of my life becoming a small, quiet, lonely thing. Mr. Gable would listen with these kind, intelligent eyes that had seen a great deal of life and loss. "Carol," he told me one afternoon, "life is a funny thing. It takes and it takes, but if you look closely, it also gives you little gifts. The trick is recognizing them. And the most important thing is to always, always keep an ace up your sleeve." I didn't fully grasp what he meant by that, not then. As the years went by, Mr. Gable began to slow down. He needed a little more help. I'd pick up his prescriptions for him, drive him to doctor's appointments, bring him meals when he was feeling unwell. I did it without a second thought, because he had become like a father to me, the father I had lost when I was just a girl. But Mr. Gable wasn't just a retired accountant living in a brick bungalow. He had been a shrewd and careful investor his whole life. He had started with a small inheritance in the 1960s, and, through decades of patient, intelligent choices in the stock market, had grown it into a substantial fortune. He lived simply, so no one in the neighborhood had any idea. The years ticked by. Mr. Gable celebrated his 80th birthday, then his 85th. His health began to fail more seriously. Arthritis made it hard for him to walk, and his eyesight was fading. I was there every day, checking on him, making sure he ate, reading the newspaper to him. David, who was a teenager then, was a great help too. He'd mow Mr. Gable's lawn and help with chores around the house. "That son of yours has a good heart, Carol," Mr. Gable would often say. "You've raised a fine young man." In 2015, Mr. Gable had a serious stroke. He recovered, but he was never the same. He was confined to his home, weak and frail. One afternoon in September, he called me over. He was sitting in his favorite armchair, a worn leather recliner with a thick manila envelope resting in his lap. "Sit down, Carol," he said, his voice thin but clear. I sat on the ottoman opposite him, my heart heavy with a sense of foreboding. "I'm 92 years old, my dear. I don't have much time left. The doctor says a few months at best." My eyes welled up with tears. I had come to love him so dearly. "I want you to know something," he continued. "I have a couple of grandnephews, my sister's grandsons. They live out of state. In the last 20 years, they have visited me exactly twice. Both times, it was to ask for money." He shook his head sadly. "They send a Christmas card. That's it." He opened the envelope and slid a stack of papers out. They were brokerage statements. "This is my investment portfolio. It's currently worth about $1.2 million. I gasped. I couldn't believe it. "Mr. Gable, why are you showing me this?" "Because," he said, looking me straight in the eye, "I want it to be yours. All of it. You and David have been the only real family I've had for a very long time." "I can't possibly accept that," I said, stunned. "What about your nephews?" "My nephews," he said with a sigh, "are waiting for me to die. You have helped me live. The decision is made." He explained he'd had his lawyer draw up the papers months ago. Everything was legally transferred to a trust in my name. I broke down and cried, overwhelmed with a mix of grief and gratitude. "But I have to ask you one thing, Carol," he said, his voice firm. "Don't tell a soul, not a single person, not even David. Not yet. Just wait. Life will show you who is worthy of your trust and who is not." "Why?" I asked through my tears. "Because money, my dear, it changes people. It brings out the ugliest parts of them. You have a good heart, Carol. Too good sometimes. And good-hearted people are often seen as easy targets by the vultures of this world. So you keep this as your ace. And one day, when someone tries to dismiss you, when they treat you like you are nothing, when they try to take away your dignity, that's when you play your hand. And you show them you were always the queen in the deck." Mr. Gable passed away 2 months later, peacefully in his sleep. His nephews showed up for the funeral, looking impatient and asking about the will. The lawyer informed them that Mr. Gable's estate consisted of a mortgaged house and a few $1,000s in the bank, all of which was left to them. They were furious. They accused me of manipulating him, of being a gold digger. They threatened to sue, but there was nothing to sue for. The portfolio was already mine, a transaction completed while he was alive and of sound mind. They took the little bit of money and disappeared. I never saw them again. And I honored Mr. Gable's wish. I kept his secret. I never told anyone. I continued to live my simple life as a librarian. I hired a financial advisor and managed the portfolio quietly, letting it grow. I paid off my own mortgage. I saved. And I waited. I waited to see who would love me for me, not for what I had. For years, David passed the test with flying colors. He was a loving, attentive son. Until Tiffany. And then, I watched in horror as my son began to transform into a man who saw his own mother as a financial opportunity, a problem to be managed, a burden to be shuffled aside. Mr. Gable had been right. Money brings out the worst in people. And I was holding the best hand anyone could ask for. Because when Tiffany marched into my home that Thursday, demanding the keys to my past, when she treated me like an irrelevant old woman, she had no idea who she was dealing with, and I was more than ready to show her. My retirement should have been a quiet joy. Instead, it became the stage for my own emotional execution. It was the Tuesday before Tiffany's ultimatum, a week before my life changed forever. David had called that morning, his voice laced with a cheerfulness that sounded rehearsed. "Mom, we want to do something special for your retirement. Tiffany's planned a celebratory dinner at our place this Saturday at 6. Don't be late, okay? I should have known. I should have heard the strings being pulled, but there's a part of a mother's heart that is a professional optimist, a fool that never stops hoping. I thought, just maybe, my son wanted to honor me, to remember all the years of hard work. How wrong I was. That Saturday, I took my time getting ready. I wore a simple navy blue dress, the one David had given me for Christmas 2 years prior. I put on a touch of lipstick and the pearl earrings Frank had given me on our 10th anniversary. I wanted to look nice, to feel worthy of a celebration. I baked a lemon pound cake, David's favorite, from my mother's recipe, wrapping it carefully to take with me. When I arrived at their sleek, minimalist apartment, I had to buzz to be let in. My heart was a nervous bird in my chest, a mix of hope and a familiar low-level dread. David opened the door. He gave me a brief, stiff hug, the kind you give a distant relative, all shoulders and no heart. Come on in, Mom. The apartment smelled of nothing in particular, certainly not of a home-cooked meal. Tiffany was perched on their modern gray sofa, a laptop glowing on the coffee table in front of her. She was in expensive-looking loungewear. She hadn't even bothered to change. She didn't get up. Hi, Carol. You can just put that cake on the kitchen counter. No. Oh, that looks wonderful. Or, thank you for baking. Just a directive. I did as I was told and came back to the living room, taking the single armchair positioned opposite the sofa, feeling like I was there for a job interview. Well, Mom, David began, clearing his throat and fidgeting with his watch. Tiffany and I wanted to talk to you about your future. Tiffany swiveled the laptop to face me. The screen was filled with a spreadsheet, columns, rows, numbers. My life reduced to a financial model. Carol, we've put together a comprehensive plan for you to ensure your retirement is stable and stress-free. A plan they had made without me. What sort of plan? I asked, my stomach twisting into a cold knot. Tiffany offered that practiced, bright smile that never touched her cold, calculating eyes. Well, we've analyzed your assets. Your pension is going to be about $800 a month, is that right? How did she know the exact figure? Then I remembered my retirement papers on my kitchen table the other day. She must have snooped while I was in the other room. That's about right, I said, my voice tight. Great. So, here's the strategy, she said, pointing a long, manicured finger at the screen. First, we sell the lake cottage. It's an old structure, a money pit, really. I've already spoken to a realtor who thinks we can get a quick cash offer of $85,000 for it. Wait a minute, I started to say. Who is we? We are, of course, Tiffany said, her tone laced with impatience, as if I were a particularly slow child. We'll handle the sale. You don't need to be bothered with the details. I held my tongue, letting her continue. Second, she went on, clicking to another tab on the spreadsheet. Your pension. $1,800 is a decent amount for one person, but we feel you should contribute to the family that has supported you. David is your son, after all. Supported me? As if raising my own child was a debt I now had to repay. We've budgeted for you to transfer 60% of your pension to our joint account each month. That's $1,080. It will help us build our savings. You'll be left with $720, which is more than enough for your utilities and groceries if you're careful. $720 to live on after a lifetime of work. And how does that help me? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Because you'll be investing in your family, Carol, Tiffany said in that patronizing way of hers. David and I want to start a family soon. Your future grandchildren will need a good home, a stable environment. She was using a child that wasn't even conceived as a tool of emotional blackmail. I looked at David. He was staring at his hands, his knuckles white. A coward. My son was a coward. And third. Tiffany slid a printed document across the coffee table towards me. We need you to sign this. It's a durable power of attorney. a power of attorney, giving them complete control over my finances, my home, my life. What if I don't want to sign? Tiffany let out a short, sharp laugh. Carol, let's be realistic. This is for your own protection. You're getting older. Things happen. A fall, a sudden illness. Do you want David to be tied up in legal red tape while you're incapacitated? It's just logical. Logical. She was talking about logic while she was orchestrating a complete takeover of my life. When do you need an answer? I asked. Now would be best. The realtor is ready to list the cottage on Monday. Of course. She had it all lined up. All she needed was my signature, my surrender. I need to think about it, I said, my voice shaking as I stood up. Mom, wait, David finally spoke, looking up at me for the first time. We haven't even had dinner. I've lost my appetite. But your cake. Give it to Tiffany, I said, my eyes locking with hers. I'm sure she'll find a use for it. I grabbed my purse and walked towards the door, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. You're being incredibly ungrateful, Carol, Tiffany called out behind me. We're only trying to help you. I didn't look back. I didn't say another word. I fumbled with the locks and escaped into the sterile hallway, the sound of the door clicking shut behind me like a cell door. I made it to my car in the visitor parking lot. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel, and then, in the silence of my old sedan, I shattered. It wasn't a gentle weeping. It was a storm of grief, deep, ragged sobs that tore through me, coming from a place of betrayal so profound I could barely breathe. The tears streamed down my face, soaking the collar of the navy dress my son had given me, back when he still saw me as his mother. It was never about the cottage. It was never about the money. It was about my son, my David, the little boy I had raised to be a good man, the boy who promised he'd always look after me after his father died. That son had just sat there and watched a stranger carve up my life, my dignity, my future, and he hadn't said a word. He saw me as an asset to be managed, a line item on a spreadsheet. I drove home on autopilot, the familiar streets looking alien and hostile. I walked into my quiet, empty home. I sank into my favorite armchair in the living room and sat in the dark for hours, staring at the ghosts of my life on the bookshelf. David's first T-ball trophy. David's high school graduation photo. His arm proudly around my shoulders. David at 25, the day he got his first real job, beaming with pride. In every memory, I was there, his biggest cheerleader. When had I become the enemy? I reached for the phone. I almost called him. I almost said the words I knew they wanted to hear. You're right. Take it all. Just please, don't leave me. But then my eyes fell on a small framed photo on the end table, next to the picture of Frank. It was Mr. Gable, sitting on his porch swing, a gentle smile on his face. I could almost hear his voice, wise and kind. Vultures only respect those who fly higher than them. I put the phone down. I walked to my bedroom, to the back of my closet. Behind a stack of old blankets, I pulled out a small, locked fireproof box. I opened it. There it was. My ace. The portfolio statements, the trust documents, the proof that I was not the poor, helpless old woman Tiffany thought I was. I picked up my cell phone and dialed a number I knew by heart, my financial advisor. Mr. Harris, it's Carol Peterson. I need to make some immediate changes to my trust. Of course, Carol. Is everything all right? You sound distressed. Everything, I said, a strange calm settling over me, is about to be put right. Because Tiffany had just woken the librarian, and librarians know that knowledge is power, and I had knowledge she couldn't even fathom. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. The hours between midnight and dawn are the loneliest, aren't they? I got out of bed around 2 a.m., wrapping myself in Frank's old flannel robe, the one that still faintly smelled of him. I padded out to the living room, the floorboards groaning under my feet, each sound amplified by the profound silence of a house that has known loss. I sat on the sofa and pulled an old photo album onto my lap. There he was, my David. A chubby baby in a yellow onesie. A gap-toothed 7-year-old on his first day of school. A lanky teenager, all awkward limbs and shy smiles. The day Frank died, clinging to my hand at the funeral, his small shoulders shaking with sobs. I traced the outline of his young face in that picture. Where did that boy go? How did he become the hollowed-out man who sat by while his wife tried to strip me of everything? I remembered the day of Frank's heart attack. A normal Tuesday morning. He was a carpenter, a strong, kind man with calloused hands and a laugh that could fill a room. He'd kissed me goodbye and told me he loved me. By lunchtime, he was gone. The company he worked for offered their condolences and a final paycheck. That was it. I was 38 years old with a 10-year-old son and a mortgage. I remember that first night, David crawling into bed with me, his little body trembling. "Mommy, is Daddy ever coming back?" "No, sweetie. He's with the angels now. But who will look after us?" He'd whispered into the dark. I held him tight and I made him a promise. A sacred vow whispered into his hair. "I will, baby. I will always look after you. You will never have to worry about a thing. I promise." And I kept that promise. Oh, how I kept it. I worked my full-time job at the library, and then I took on extra work. I did freelance indexing for professors at the local college late into the night. I worked weekends shelving books at the university library. David never knew how many meals I skipped so he could have new sneakers. He never knew that the heirloom silver I sold was to pay for his class trip to Washington, D.C. He never knew that for 2 years, I didn't buy a single new piece of clothing for myself so he could have a computer for his schoolwork. I shielded him from the struggle. I wanted him to have a childhood, not a burden. And it worked. He graduated from college with a degree in finance. I was there in the audience, crying so hard I could barely see him walk across the stage. He hugged me afterwards, his cap askew. "Thanks, Mom," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. I'll never forget it." Where was that gratitude now? Where was the man who had made that promise? A fresh wave of tears came, hot and bitter. It wasn't just about David. It was for me. For the years I had sacrificed. For the loneliness I had endured. For the life I had put on hold for him. And now, my reward was to be put out to pasture, my only value being the cash my assets could generate for his wife. I reached for my phone again. 3:30 a.m. My thumb hovered over Tiffany's contact information. I was so close to surrendering, so close to begging for scraps of affection from my own son's table. "Okay, you win. Take the cottage. Take the money. Just let me see my son. Just let me be in his life." The pain of being erased was more terrifying than the pain of being robbed. My finger was about to press the call button, but my gaze drifted to the mantelpiece over the fireplace. There was the photo of Frank, handsome and smiling, the photo of my parents on their wedding day, and the photo of Mr. Gable, his kind eyes seeming to look right at me, right into my soul. I remembered one of our last conversations on his porch swing. "Carol," he had said, looking out at his roses, "do you know the difference between being kind and being a doormat?" "I'm not sure," I'd admitted. "Kindness," he'd explained, "is offering a hand to someone who is struggling. Being a doormat is letting someone wipe their feet on you because you're afraid they'll walk away. Kindness is an act of strength. Being a doormat is an act of fear. When someone who is supposed to love you treats you like an inconvenience," he'd added, "that's not a call for more kindness. That's a signal to take your hand back." I stood up, put the phone down, and walked over to the fireplace. "Mr. Gable," I whispered to the photograph. "You told me to keep my ace. You told me to wait. I think the time has come." The silence in the house felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was expectant. I went back to my room, to the fireproof box. I laid the documents out on my bed. The proof of my true financial standing. The brokerage statements, now totaling over $1.2 million. The deed to my own home, paid in full. I pulled out a notepad and a pen and began to calculate. The total value of everything that Tiffany and David had no idea existed. The number was staggering. Me. The quiet, frugal librarian. The old woman who needed a life plan made for her. The woman they wanted to control with a power of attorney. I was worth nearly $1.5 million, and they were about to lose it all over a greedy grab for an $85,000 cottage. A part of me, the mother in me, still felt a pang of guilt. He's my son. Shouldn't I want to share this with him? But then I remembered his vacant eyes during Tiffany's presentation, his silence, his cowardice. I remembered the $9,200 I'd lent them that was never paid back. I remembered every casual dismissal, every condescending remark he had allowed, and the soft part of my heart hardened. David had made his bed. He had chosen his side. Now I would choose mine. I pulled out my old address book from the desk drawer. I flipped through the pages until I found the name I was looking for. Sarah Jenkins. Sarah. A young woman, no older than 30, who used to bring her 2 little kids, a boy and a girl, to my story hour at the library every week. A bright, sweet woman with a tired kindness in her eyes. Her husband, a firefighter, had died in a training accident about 6 months ago. I remembered hearing about it, my heart breaking for her. I'd seen her a few weeks ago at the grocery store. She looked exhausted, her cart filled with generic brands. She told me she was working 2 cleaning jobs to make ends meet, but the landlord was selling the little house they rented, and she didn't know where they were going to go. I looked at the clock. 4:15 a.m. I would wait a few more hours before I called her. I went back to bed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of purpose. When I woke up a few hours later, the sun was streaming through my window. It was a new day, and I was a new woman. I was no longer a victim in their story. I was about to become the author of my own. While they were busy plotting my dispossession, I was about to rewrite the entire book. At 8 o'clock sharp, I dialed Sarah's number. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. Hello? Her voice was soft, hesitant. Sarah, dear, it's Carol Peterson, from the library. Mrs. Peterson. Her voice instantly warmed. How are you? I was so sad to hear you were retiring. I'm doing just fine, dear. Listen, I know this is out of the blue, but I was hoping you could do me a favor. Could you possibly meet me this morning? Say, in an hour? There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of a cartoon in the background. Oh, I have a house to clean at 9:30, Mrs. Peterson. I really can't afford to miss it. I'll pay you for your time, Sarah. Double what you would have made. I just need an hour or so. Another longer pause. Is everything all right? You don't sound like yourself. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt like breaking free. On the contrary, Sarah, everything is about to be very, very right. For you. Trust me. Okay, she said, a note of confused curiosity in her voice. I'll be at your house at 9. I hung up and got ready. I showered and dressed in a pair of crisp trousers and a cream-colored sweater. I put on my pearl earrings. Today was an occasion worth dressing for. I made a pot of fresh coffee and set out the lemon pound cake I had brought home untouched from that disastrous dinner. I set the table with my good cups, as if I were welcoming royalty. Because in my book, a hard-working, decent mother like Sarah was royalty. At precisely 8:55, my doorbell rang. I opened it to see Sarah standing on my porch. She was 30 going on 50, the way grief and worry can age a person. She was wearing simple jeans and a faded t-shirt, her hair in a messy bun. There were dark circles under her eyes, but those eyes, they still held a light. A gentle, resilient light. Mrs. Peterson. She gave me a warm hug. She smelled of baby powder and sheer exhaustion. Come in, my dear. Please sit. I led her into the kitchen and poured her a cup of coffee, cutting a thick slice of cake for her. She ate it like she hadn't had a proper breakfast in weeks, which she probably hadn't. How are the children? I asked. They're okay, with my mom for the morning. She helps when she can. She took a sip of coffee and looked at me, her brow furrowed with concern. Mrs. Peterson, what's going on? I sat down across from her and took her hands in mine. They were rough, with calloused palms and nails cut short, the hands of a woman who never stopped working. Sarah, do you remember that book you used to check out for your little girl every single week? The one about the little house that found a family? She smiled, a faint, sad smile. Of course. The Little House. Lily adored that story. Well, I said, taking a deep breath, I want to talk to you about a little house that needs a family. I don't understand. I want to give you my cottage, Sarah. The one on the lake. She froze, the coffee cup halfway to her lips. She stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. What? Mrs. Peterson? No, I can't. That's your home. It's my second home, and I want it to be your first. For you and your children. No rent, no mortgage. It's yours. Sarah started to cry, silent tears rolling down her tired cheeks. No, I couldn't possibly. It's too much. You need it. You need it more, I said, my voice firm but gentle. I heard you were losing your rental. I heard you were struggling. My cottage is just sitting there empty most of the year. It needs to be filled with laughter again. It needs children running in the yard. It needs you. But why? She whispered. Why me? Because for 40 years I watched families come and go from my library. I saw parents who cared and parents who didn't. I saw kids who were loved and kids who were overlooked. And I always saw you, Sarah. I saw the way you read to your children, the patience in your voice, the love in your eyes. I saw a good person, a good mother, who has been dealt a terrible hand. And because, I squeezed her hands, Frank would have wanted this. He built that house for a family to love it. She was openly sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. You were the only person who was kind to me after John died, she cried. Everyone else, they just looked away. You always asked how I was doing. You always gave the kids an extra sticker. And now, I said softly, I want to give you a foundation, a safe place, a new beginning. An hour and a half later, we were in my lawyer's office. The paperwork had been drawn up overnight. I signed the deed transfer. I paid the gift tax without even flinching. In less than 30 minutes, the cottage on Black Bear Lake legally belonged to Sarah Jenkins and her 2 children. I handed her the keys. She held them in her trembling hand like they were made of spun glass. I don't know how I can ever repay you, Mrs. Peterson. You already have, dear, just by being the person you are. That's more than my own family has shown me lately. We walked out of the lawyer's office into the bright morning sun. It's mine? She whispered, looking at the keys in her palm. It's really, truly mine? It's yours. She looked at me, her eyes shining with tears, but this time, they were tears of hope. I'll take care of it, I promise. I'll love it. I know you will. Just promise me one thing. Anything. When your kids are grown, when you're back on your feet and life is good again, you pay it forward. You find someone else who needs a hand up and you give it to them. Kindness is a current, not a container. I promise, she said, her voice full of conviction. I promise. She gave me one last fierce hug and practically floated to her beat-up old car. I watched her drive away, and for the first time in months, I felt a deep, profound sense of peace. I walked the few blocks back to my house. It was 11:30 a.m. At 1 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I knew who it would be. I opened the door. There was Tiffany, dressed in a sharp business suit, perfect makeup, her hair immaculate. And standing just behind her was a balding, nervous-looking man in a cheap suit, clutching a briefcase that said, Lakeside Realty. "Hello, Carol. I'm here for the cottage keys." Her voice was crisp, expectant. "This is Mr. Davies. He's the realtor." Mr. Davies offered a weak smile. I just stood in the doorway, my expression unreadable. "Tiffany," I said, my voice even. "Could you walk with me for a moment? Out to the driveway." She frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "What for? Just give me the keys so we can get the sign put up." "Just come with me." I turned and walked toward my driveway. She and a confused-looking Mr. Davies followed. I stopped at the end of the driveway and turned to face them. "There's been a change of plans." "What do you mean?" she snapped. "The cottage is no longer for sale." The silence that followed was electric. Then, Tiffany's face contorted with a rage she didn't bother to hide. "What did you do?" I looked her directly in the eye, my newfound calm a shield against her fury. "I gave it away." Her jaw dropped. She went through a series of emotions in a split second. Confusion, disbelief, fury, and then pure, unadulterated panic. "You what? That cottage was worth $85,000. "It was my cottage," I said simply. "And I decided what to do with it." Mr. Davies cleared his throat. Listen, if the property is no longer available, I should probably be going." "Wait!" Tiffany grabbed his arm, her grip like a vice. "She's just confused. She'll get it back. Won't you, Carol?" "No." "I'll sue you. That was family property." I smiled. The same calm, quiet smile from before. "It was never family property, Tiffany. It was my private property. And I am free to do with it as I wish, without your permission, without anyone's permission." She whipped out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. "David, your mother just gave the cottage away. Yes, gave it away. You need to get over here right now." She hung up and glared at me, all pretense of civility gone. "You're not going to get away with this, you manipulative old woman." And in that moment, the mask was gone completely. The monster was out. I saw the real monster, stripped of its clever disguise, all raw greed and spitting fury. Mr. Davies, the realtor, stammered something about a misunderstanding and practically ran back to his car. Tiffany and I were left on the driveway, the empty space between us crackling with a tension so thick I could taste it. "I'm going inside my house now," I said, my voice as level as a freshly ironed sheet. "You can wait for David on the public sidewalk." "I am not waiting on the sidewalk. I'm his wife. I'm coming in." "On the street," I repeated, and turned and walked to my door, closing it firmly behind me. I heard her shriek of rage from the other side, followed by a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. Words a daughter-in-law should never, ever say. But the strange thing was, they didn't hurt me. It was like listening to static on the radio. Annoying, but meaningless. I went to my kitchen, poured myself a tall glass of iced water, and sat at the table. My hands were perfectly steady. My heart was beating at a calm, even rhythm. For months, I had been consumed by fear, by a desperate need to keep the peace. Now, all I felt was a profound and startling clarity. 20 minutes later, I heard the sound of a car screeching to a halt outside. A car door slammed. I heard Tiffany's high-pitched, hysterical voice, punctuated by sobs. Then, a heavy, frantic pounding on my front door. "Mom, open this door right now." I stood up, smoothed down my sweater, and walked to the door. I opened it. David stood there, his face blotchy and red, a vein pulsing in his temple. He'd clearly rushed from his office. His tie was askew and his shirt was rumpled. Behind him, Tiffany was a wreck. Her perfect makeup was streaked with tears, her hair coming loose from its severe ponytail. She no longer looked like a powerful executive. She looked like exactly what she was, a cornered animal. "Mom, what the hell did you do?" David's voice was a ragged mix of disbelief and fury. I gave away my cottage. To who? To Sarah Jenkins. You remember her from the library? The young woman whose husband died last year. That property was worth a fortune, Tiffany wailed from behind him. It was my property, I said, my gaze fixed on my son. You had no right. Tiffany tried to shove past him, but David held up an arm to block her. Mom, he said, taking a shaky breath, trying to regain control. We had plans for that money. Tiffany and I were counting on it. You and Tiffany seem to have a lot of plans that involve my assets, David. But you never seem to plan on including me in the conversation. Because you're our mother. Family is supposed to help each other. There is a vast difference between helping and being plundered. Nobody is plundering you. Tiffany finally managed to push past David and storm into my living room. You are a selfish, ungrateful old woman. David has taken care of you his entire life, and this is how you thank him? I let out a laugh. It was a dry, brittle sound. David took care of me? Is that the story you tell yourself, Tiffany? I turned my full attention to my son. I looked him dead in the eye. David Peterson, you look at me right now and you tell me the truth. When have you ever taken care of me? He had the grace to look away, his eyes falling to the floor. Let me help you with your memory, I said, my voice rising, gaining strength with every word. I took care of you. Since you were 10 years old and your father died. I worked 2 jobs. I sold my own mother's jewelry. I went without so you could have. I put you through college without you ever taking on a single dollar of debt. And when you finally had a career, when you were finally on your feet, what did I ask for in return? Sunday dinners. That's it. Not money, not favors, just your time. David was silent, his jaw working. And then she arrived, I said, gesturing towards Tiffany. And suddenly, Sunday dinners were an inconvenience. And the phone calls stopped. And the only time you came to see me was when you needed to borrow money. $800, Saudi $500, $3,000. A total of $9,200 over 2 years, David. How much of that have you paid back? The silence in the room was deafening. That's right, 0. We needed that money, Tiffany shrieked. Be quiet, I said, and the ice in my voice made her flinch. This is not about you. Not yet. This is about my son. I'm his wife. You're a parasite, I said, the word hanging in the air between us. Tiffany lunged at me, her face a mask of rage. David caught her around the waist, holding her back. Let me go. This old witch needs to be taught a lesson. You want to talk about lessons, Tiffany? I walked over to my bookshelf and pulled out a thick, legal-sized folder. Let's have a lesson. I opened it on the coffee table in front of them. It was filled with papers, bank statements, credit reports, photographs. I know that when you met my son, you had over $15,000 in credit card debt. I know you've been fired from your last 2 jobs for poor performance. I know that wellness startup I invested $3,000 of my savings in was a sham you knew was failing from the start. Her face went white. How? Because I'm not a fool, Tiffany. Because when you started pushing for power of attorney 6 months ago, my instincts told me something was very, very wrong. So I hired a private investigator. David stared at me, his mouth agape. These, I said, tapping the papers, are your current debts. Over $30,000. What have you been doing with David's salary while you're charging spa days and designer handbags? David slowly reached for the folder, his hands trembling as he looked through the statements. Tiffany, is this true? He can explain. And this? David held up a photograph. It was a picture of Tiffany at a cozy restaurant, holding hands across the table with another man. Who is this? That's just a colleague from work. Your colleague from work? I interjected. His name is Mark Renshaw. He's a senior partner at a law firm downtown. He's also married with 3 children, and he's been your lover for the last year. The world seemed to stop. David dropped the folder, the papers scattering across the floor. He looked at Tiffany as if she were a complete stranger. "You're cheating on me?" "No, she's lying. Your mother is a bitter, jealous old woman who is trying to destroy our marriage." "The investigator has dozens more photos, Tiffany," I said calmly. "Videos, too, of you checking into hotels, of you at his apartment. Shall I have him send them to David's phone right now?" Tiffany looked at me, and the hatred in her eyes was so pure, so potent, it was almost a physical force. "Why?" David whispered, his voice cracking. "Why would you marry me if you didn't love me?" Tiffany didn't answer. I answered for her. "Because she thought you were an easy mark with a wealthy mother. She heard the rumors about Frank's family having old money. She thought I was sitting on a fortune. She married you to get to me. That's why she was always snooping. That's why she wanted the power of attorney. That's why she wanted to sell my things, put me in a home and take control of everything." "Lies!" Tiffany was screaming now, completely unhinged. "It's all lies." "Am I resentful?" I said, my voice like steel. "No. I'd be resentful if I'd let you win. If I had meekly handed over my keys and signed your papers. But I'm not resentful, Tiffany. I'm intelligent. Something you clearly underestimated." She flew at me again, and this time David didn't just stop her. He physically shoved her back. "Get out," he said, his voice dangerously low. "What?" "Get out of my mother's house." "David, don't do this. She's manipulating you." I said, "Get out!" He grabbed her by the arm and started pulling her towards the door. She fought him, screaming, crying, clawing at him. "David, please. I love you. She's the one who's lying." He managed to get her onto the porch and slammed the door shut. We could hear her pounding on the door, her voice a litany of curses and threats and desperate pleas. David leaned his back against the door, his chest heaving. And then he just slid down to the floor, put his head in his hands, and began to sob. Gut-wrenching, heartbroken sobs that came from the very depths of his soul. "I'm sorry, Mom," he choked out between sobs. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. What did I do? What did I do?" I didn't rush to him. I let him cry. I let the poison out. After a few moments, I walked over and sat on the floor beside him, putting a hand on his shaking back. For the first time in a very long time, it felt like my son had come home. But the lesson wasn't over. Not yet. That's when I went to my room and came back with the thick manila envelope that held the final truth. David was still on the floor, the storm of his weeping finally subsiding into shuddering breaths. Outside, Tiffany had finally given up. I heard her car door slam and the sound of tires squealing as she sped away, leaving a trail of scorched rubber and broken trust. I sat down at the dining room table. "David, get up. Come and sit down." He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. He looked 10 years old again. He slowly, painfully, got to his feet and slumped into a chair across from me. I placed the envelope on the table between us. The envelope Mr. Gable had given me, my ace up the sleeve. "Before we talk about Tiffany, before we talk about anything else, there's something I have to show you." "What is it?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "This was supposed to be your future." I opened the flap and slid out the contents, laying them on the table one by one, like a dealer revealing a winning hand. First, the most recent statement from my investment portfolio. David picked it up. He stared at it, his brow furrowed in confusion. Then his eyes widened. This can't be right. This says $1.2 million. It's right." "Since when?" he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "Since 2015? Mr. Gable left me his entire investment portfolio when he died. He made me promise not to tell anyone. He said to wait. He said money reveals a person's true character. He said I should wait and see who loved me for me, and who loved me for what they thought they could get." I slid the second document across the table. This was my will. The one I had written right after you married Tiffany. He picked it up and read it, his lips moving silently. He looked up at me, fresh tears welling in his eyes. You left me everything, he choked out. The house, the portfolio, everything. 100%. You were my son, my only child. Of course I did. But then, I continued, my voice soft but firm, things started to change. You started to change. You let her get between us. You let her disrespect me. You sat there in silence while she planned to take everything I had. And I started to wonder. Wonder what? If you still loved your mother, or if you just loved your inheritance. No, Mom, never! Let me finish. I held up a hand. So, 3 months ago, I made a new will. I slid the final document across the table. This is my current, legally binding last will and testament, signed and witnessed on August 22nd, 2025. I watched his face as he read it. I saw the progression from confusion to shock to a look of utter devastation. Only 10%, he whispered, looking up at me, his face pale. Only 10% for you. The other 90% is being divided between 3 charities and Sarah Jenkins, the woman I gave the cottage to. People and causes that have shown me kindness without expecting anything in return. But Mom? I'm your son. And they, I said, my voice unwavering, are the ones who have acted like it. They are the ones who treat me with respect. I love you, Mom, he pleaded, his voice breaking. Then love me now, while I'm alive, David. Not after I'm gone. He broke down completely then, his head on the table, his shoulders shaking with a grief that was about more than just money. It was about everything he had lost, everything he had thrown away. Forgive me, he sobbed. Please, Mom, forgive me. I was a fool. I was so blind. I let her turn me against you, the one person in the world who has only ever loved me. I stood up, walked around the table, and put my hands on his shoulders. I made him look at me, his tear-streaked face a ruin of the handsome man he was. Michael, look at me. My name is David. David. I corrected myself, my own emotions threatening to overwhelm me. I forgive you. You do? Yes, because you are my son. And because I know the good man I raised is still in there somewhere, buried under years of her influence. But, he asked, sensing there was more. But forgiveness and trust are 2 different things. Forgiveness is a gift I give to myself, so I don't have to carry this anger. Trust is something you are going to have to earn back, and it will take a very, very long time. Whatever it takes, Mom, I'll do whatever it takes. And this will, I said, tapping the document, is not changing. Not anytime soon. I need to see actions, David. Not just words. I need to know you've learned the lesson. He nodded, wiping his eyes on his sleeve. And Tiffany? Tiffany is your mess to clean up. You decide what you're going to do with your marriage. But let me tell you this. A woman who cheats on you, who lies to you, and who tries to destroy your mother does not love you. She never has. I know, he said, his voice a hollow echo. I know that now. He stared at the papers on the table, at the evidence of a life I had lived completely hidden from him. All these years, he said quietly, I thought you were just my mom, the librarian, struggling to get by. And you were a millionaire. I'm not a millionaire, David. I am a woman who learned to be careful. A woman who learned that dignity is the only currency that truly matters. A woman who learned that sometimes you have to keep secrets to protect yourself, even from the people you love the most. A long silence fell between us. What do I do now? He finally asked. Now, I said, you go home, to your empty apartment, and you start figuring out who you are without her, without me. And you start to rebuild your own life on your own terms. And you can start by paying me back the $9,200 you owe me. I will, he said, standing up. I promise. We hugged then, A real hug. The kind we hadn't shared in years. It felt like coming home. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of silence from Tiffany. 2 weeks of daily phone calls from David. At first, they were awkward, filled with apologies. Then, they slowly became more normal. "Morning, Mom. Just calling to see how you slept." "Hey, Mom. I'm at the grocery store. Do you need anything?" One afternoon, he came over with a bouquet of my favorite flowers, yellow roses. "I filed for divorce," he said simply. The legal battle was short and ugly, but with the investigators' evidence, Tiffany had no leg to stand on. The last I heard, she had moved back to whatever city she came from, presumably in search of her next target. Some people are just black holes. My story is about my son. 3 months later, on a crisp Saturday morning, he came over and handed me a cashier's check for $9,200. "It's all there," he said, a look of quiet pride on his face. "I sold my fancy car and took a second job on weekends, but it's paid in full." Tears streamed down my face. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did, Mom. You taught me to pay my debts. I had just forgotten the lesson." I tore up the check. "Your debt is paid," I told him. "Welcome home." My life now is quiet, but it is not lonely. David comes for dinner every single Sunday. We talk. We laugh. He is healing. He is becoming the man I always knew he could be. The will? It's still the same. But it's no longer a punishment. It's a principle. A reminder that family is not about blood, it's about respect. Sarah and her children are thriving in the cottage. She sends me pictures every week. They are my bonus family, a gift born from betrayal. If my story can teach you anything, let it be this. Your worth is not negotiable. Your dignity is not for sale. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is smile, hold your cards close, and wait for the perfect moment to play your winning hand. And when you do, you don't just win the game, you win yourself back. My story is a reminder that even in our quietest moments, we hold immense power. Thank you for listening to me today. Our community here at Grandma's Daily Story is a place where these life lessons are shared every single day. If you don't want to miss the story I have for you tomorrow, make sure to subscribe and click that little notification bell. And if my story today resonated with you, I'm sure you'll find another one to touch your heart in one of the videos you see on your screen now. Thank you for being here. You are not alone.